The house was a small, two-story affair, with white siding on the bottom floor and gray shingles on the top. 3 windows were facing the street, a large picture window, a small rectangular one above that, and another large window below it. I got out of my car and walked towards the door, knocking twice before it opened. A woman stood there, wearing a blue dress with her hair tied back in a bun. She had bright green eyes that seemed to sparkle when she saw me standing outside her house. "Hello," she said cheerfully. Her voice was soft, but carried well through the night air. "Hi, are you Miss Tanner?" She nodded. "Yes, I am." She smiled again and stepped aside so I could enter the house. It smelled odd inside. Not bad or anything like that, just strange, like old books and dust. "Please come in." I entered her living room. It wasn't much more than a couch and a coffee table, an end table with a lamp on it. That's all I really needed for a place to sleep. The walls were painted yellow, which looked nice against the dark furniture. The carpet was black and covered most of the hardwood floors. There was a small kitchen off to the side of the living room with a sink, a stove, and a fridge. Everything was clean and tidy. "Sorry for the mess," she said, while pointing to some boxes stacked in the corner. "My husband died last year, and I just haven't had the time to get around to moving everything yet." "No problem. I don't mind sleeping in a bit of mess." She chuckled. "Well, if you want to put your things away, feel free. Just make sure not to take too long, since I have to leave in a few hours." "Okay, thank you." "You're welcome. I'll be right back." She disappeared down a hallway. As I looked around the room, I noticed something else odd about the house. The walls weren't straight. They bulged outward here and there like they'd been pushed from the inside out by someone, pushing their way through them. It was subtle enough that it didn't bother me at first, but as I looked closer, I realized that it wasn't just the walls. Every single surface in the entire house had these little imperfections, including the ceiling and the floor. I heard footsteps coming down the hall and turned to see Miss Tanner returning with 2 glasses filled with water. She handed me one and took a seat on the couch across from me. "So, what brings you out this way?" she asked as she sipped her drink. "I'm looking for a friend of mine. He went missing in the area about a month ago." "Oh, that's dreadful. What happened?" "He just vanished." I paused as I thought about how to explain. "He was staying in an abandoned hotel nearby and never came back. We think he might have gotten lost in the woods." She shook her head sadly. "That's awful. Is there any chance he survived? Maybe ran away somewhere?" "I don't know. I hope so." She sighed heavily and leaned back on the couch. "I'm sorry. I wish I could help you find him." We sat quietly for a few moments before she spoke up again. "I don't mean to pry, but are you sure he isn't still alive? Maybe he's hiding somewhere or something." "Well, maybe," I said hesitantly. "Do you have any idea where he might have gone?" "I'm not sure, but I have a hunch." She laughed softly and shook her head. "Well, let me know if you hear anything about him. I'll keep my ears open as well." "Thanks. I better get some sleep now," I said, standing up from the couch. "Of course. I'll show you to your room." I downed the glass of water and placed it on the table. Even that seemed crooked. "Thanks again for letting me stay here." "You're more than welcome. Please feel free to use anything in the kitchen if you need anything." "I will." I followed her down the hallway to a staircase leading to the second floor. At the top of those stairs was another hallway that led to 3 doors, one on each side and one at the end. She pointed to the door on the left. "That one's yours. No one else is staying this weekend, so other doors will be locked." She opened the door to my room and flicked a light switch. There was a dresser opposite the bed with a window above it, and a small bed with a nightstand next to it. The wall behind the bed was covered in posters of famous horror movies, slasher flicks mostly. "This should be all set up for you." She motioned towards the bed. "Make yourself comfortable. My room is on the 3rd floor if you need anything." "Thank you. I'll keep that in mind." She walked over to the door at the end of the hall and closed it behind her before disappearing into her own room. I took a look around my room before lying down on the bed. The sheets were clean and smelled nice. but I couldn't tell whether they'd been washed recently or not. As I got under them, I noticed something strange about them. They felt heavy, like they were weighted down on one side. When I tried to lift them up, they wouldn't budge. I rolled over on my back and pulled at them, but still no give. Something was definitely wrong with this place. I lay there staring at the ceiling for a while before drifting off into a deep but restless sleep. I woke up sometime later to a knocking on the other side of my door. I sat up and rubbed my eyes before standing up from the bed. "Who is it?" I called out, walking over to the door. There was no answer. I unlocked the door and cracked it open. It was dark outside, but the moon was bright enough that I could see everything clearly. I stepped out into the hallway and saw nothing except darkness. "Hello?" I called again, but once again there was no response. "Is someone there?" I asked as I turned around slowly. I heard another knock from behind me, and spun around only to catch sight of Miss Tanner standing in the doorway to her room. Her hair had fallen loose from her bun and hung down past her shoulders. She was wearing a white tank top and blue pajama pants with red stripes down them. She looked like she was trying to hide herself by covering her face with her hands, which were pressed against her cheeks. "Miss Tanner?" She didn't say anything, continuing to stare at me with wide eyes. "Are you okay?" I asked as I approached her. She nodded, but kept her head down. What's happened?" I asked as I reached out to touch her shoulder. She flinched away from my hand and backed up until she hit the wall behind her. Then, without saying a word, she ran down the hallway and disappeared into the shadows. I stood there for several seconds, dumbfounded by what had happened. What the hell had I just witnessed? Was it real? Or was it just one of those dreams or hallucinations brought on by stress or exhaustion? I went back inside my room and locked the door behind me. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and checked the time. It was after midnight. I'd been asleep for hours. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the poster of Friday the 13th hanging on the wall above the desk. Why would Miss Tanner act like that? And why would she try to hide from me when I touched her? It made no sense. I sighed heavily and laid back down on the bed. I wanted to go back to sleep, but I knew I couldn't fall asleep now. Not until I figured out what was going on here. Maybe if I waited long enough, she'd come back out and explain herself. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because suddenly I was shaken awake by someone pounding on the door. "Wake up!" I jumped up from the bed and opened the door to find Miss Tanner standing in front of me, with her hands balled into fists at her side. "What's wrong?" "Get dressed. You have to leave right now," she said frantically as she began to pace back and forth. "Why?" "You don't know how dangerous this place is. Get your things and get out, now." "What are you talking about?" She stopped pacing and looked me dead in the eye. "The house is cursed." "What?" "It's haunted. There are spirits in this house." I laughed nervously and shook my head. "There aren't any ghosts here." "Then what do you call that thing you saw earlier tonight?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied. Was she talking about herself? "I'm not leaving until I get some answers." "Please, just go. If you stay here much longer, something bad will happen to you, just like your friend." "My friend?" "Just go," she yelled. She started running downstairs. "Wait," I shouted after her, but it was too late. She was already halfway up the steps before she turned around and glared at me. "Tell me what happened." "He died," she said simply. "How?" "They got him." "Who?" "The monsters." I blinked at her and tried to process what she was telling me. "Monsters?" "Yes, the monsters. They came through the walls and they took him away." "Are you insane?" I screamed at her. "There's no such thing as ghosts or monsters." She frowned at me and shook her head. "There are more things than just that." Then she pointed to the floor below us. "You need to leave right now before they come for you next." "I can't leave. My friend might be here somewhere. He could still be alive." She let out a frustrated sigh and walked over to the window. She pushed aside the curtains and looked outside. The moon was bright enough that I could see everything clearly. I followed her gaze out the window and saw nothing except for darkness. She pulled open the window and leaned out into the night air. "He's leaving," she called out into the darkness. I heard a low growl coming from what sounded like inside the walls. Miss Tanner slowly backed away from the window. Then, without warning, she fell backwards onto the ground. Her body hit the floor with a sickening crunch and didn't move again. I stood there, staring at Miss Tanner's broken form lying on the floor for several seconds, before turning around and sprinting down the stairs. The whole house began to creak and moan, and it appeared as if the walls were closing in on me. I ran past the kitchen and the living room, both of which appeared to be untouched, and headed towards the front door. The only light came from the moon shining through the windows of the hallway. As I approached the exit, I felt something grab hold of my shoulder and pull me back. I spun around quickly to see a figure standing in the shadows behind me. It was tall and thin, with oily skin and long black hair. Its face was covered by a mask made of human bones. I struggled against its grip, but couldn't break free. The walls looked as if they were melting, and more human bone-masked faces were emerging from all around me, surrounding me on all sides and closing in on me until I couldn't breathe. I reached out to touch one of them, but only grabbed hold of empty air. Then suddenly, I was dragged back through the walls, felt myself descending into that pitch-black abyss beneath me. I woke up gasping for breath and sat right up in bed. My heart was racing and my body was soaked with sweat. There was a loud bang on the door and I jumped out of bed. I unlocked the door and opened it slightly, just enough to see who was knocking. But when I did, I wasn't surprised to see Mrs. Tanner standing there with her hands balled into fists at her side. "Get dressed. You have to leave right now." All I ever wanted was for my wife and I to live comfortably. But the longer we stayed together, the higher our bills became. We'd already fought off debt from college, barely scraping by. Even after we paid them off, we were only able to afford a tiny apartment on the outskirts of New York. Sidewalks laid cracked everywhere, while finely condemned buildings sat sadly against their crooked foundations. Crooked lamp posts that hang only by electrical wires. Graffiti marked every street corner, and bland art that existed without rhyme or reason. Homeless people could be found on every street corner, a constant reminder of what would happen to my wife and I if I failed to keep up with our payments. However, I managed to make somewhat decent money as a plumber, but even then, it sometimes wasn't enough to deal with the loan sharks, the hefty utility bills, the food prices, and gas money. I was willing to do anything to get us out of there. And that is where I encountered gambling. I was willing to take the risk. I'd take any chance to obtain a reward, even just a small one. It started out with a handful of poker games. Then I moved on to scratch tickets and slot machines. All I needed was enough to get by. Unfortunately, obtaining a payday from the casinos was impossible. I started growing desperate, which only led to more debt. The whole cycle sucked me down like Odysseus' ship into Charybdis' maw. Just like that, my relationship with my wife began to tear apart. My wife and I were once so close. Before we married, there would be days that we'd work together at the wood shop, creating 3D prints of various sci-fi characters in video games. Other times we'd study the components of circuits and use them to create elaborate lighting displays whenever Christmas arrived. Our wedding day was supposed to be the greatest day of our lives. Instead of relying on the help of others, like we did back in college, we relied on ourselves. But my actions tore all that apart. I didn't know what else to do either. A few nights ago, I arrived at my apartment, having completed a 10-hour shift fixing drains of several upper-class tenements. I rested my hand on the knob, expecting the worst from my wife. Sighing, I pushed the door open. The moment I did, she was already in the front hall. Her eyes were scrunched, and she was holding a bank statement, smacking it for emphasis. "Care to explain?" she demanded. I rubbed my temples, removing my scum-covered overalls and plopping them right into the nearest laundry hamper. We locked eyes. Breaking eye contact with her would only ignite her anger further. She was holding another piece of evidence of my failure to strike it rich. All I could do was stand there sheepishly, tail tucked behind me, and wait to get ripped a new one. No words would come out of my mouth. She marched up to me, holding it in my face. "Frank, you wasted $3,000 at the casino again, didn't you?" my wife bellowed. I set my toolbox down and washed the pipe gunk off my hands, looking down for just a bit. "Turn around and look me in the eye." Resting a hand on my eyes, I glanced over her petite frame. Then I began to speak. "We can live comfortably if you just give—" "Enough of your excuses. We nearly lost our apartment twice from all the betting on the slots. You wasted our heating money on roulette. And now this. The landlord wants $4,000 in 2 weeks. And if we can't get it sorted out, we're going to lose our apartment." I held up my hand reassuringly. "Look, just let me figure this out. I'll think of some way to get money. You better, otherwise we're getting a divorce. You got it?" Without another word, I put on a casual outfit and exited for some fresh air, shutting the door behind me. I gazed back at the unpolished apartment number on the frame. Wincing, I clenched a fist and descended the rickety stairs. Eventually my boots hit the cracked pavement and I headed off. I stood outside a graffiti-covered subway station, pacing around, hands in my pockets. My fists constricted as I pounded a nearby wall. There's no way I could have been able to make that kind of money. Craps were too unpredictable, arcade machines were always rigged, and roulette was too high in stakes. Seeing red, I screamed and kicked a wall as hard as I could. My foot throbbed, and once I was done with my fit, I broke down sobbing. The sidewalk darkened with my tears. I pressed my head against it, clawing at it until my fingernails turned crimson. Then I felt a tap on my shoulder. Wiping my tears away, I glanced over. A card was lying on the floor. Its borders were covered in green dollar symbols. The rest of the card was a silver color, shiny enough to reflect my face in it. Written in gold letters were the following: Aces High Casino. Win 1 round of blackjack and earn $50 million. No monetary wager needed. Table 777. My eyes lit up. All I had to do was win 1 game of blackjack and I'd be rich. Dimples formed at the corners of my cheeks and I pumped my fist. I nearly clicked my heels in joy, but I decided against it. I'd already caused enough of a scene already, and I wanted to make sure nobody knew my secret. When I flipped it around, it had an address also written in gold letters. Despite the address being in an unknown area, I still managed to pull it up on my phone's maps and arrive without much struggle. The casino itself was a pigsty, to say the least. Smokers polluted the air and the prison-gray interior. Slot machines with broken lights clicked and whirred while cheap dice clattered against tables with peeling felt. Meanwhile, the concrete floor was covered in colonies of roaches while neglected beer bottles sat against the rugs of several tables. The only thing that was well kept was the bar and a room draped with navy blue curtains and gold sashes. Emblazoned over the doorway was the number 777. This was the first time I'd entered a casino smiling. For once, I thought this was my lucky night. When I pushed the curtain away, they revealed a room with an ornamented black wallpaper, an assortment of oak desks, and other furniture. The walls were covered in fine Baroque paintings. On the floor was a single blue carpet covered in opulent tapestries. I followed the back wall to a single dealer table coated in green felt. 2 seats were present, with one person taking the seat on the left. He was shaking with what I assumed then was excitement. Behind him was a dealer, a trim man with blonde hair and a top hat over his nose and eyes. He wore a dapper tuxedo free of blemishes that shimmered in the light of a single hanging gas lamp. His skin was pure, free of moles, glistening with a slight amount of glitter. "Why, hello there," the man spoke, his voice slicker than the gel in his hair. "Are you here to win big?" Unlike the loan sharks, his teeth were cleaner than a freshly washed plate. "Yup, deal me in," I said, straightening my back. shuffling into the last seat. The other player had his jaw locked together. His eyes were drooping and bloodshot. Sweat pooled around his brow like glass beads. Just like him, I always felt nervous about losing, so their reactions were understandable. You know the rules of blackjack. I deal out cards. You say hit me if you want more cards. You get closest to 21 without going over. Dealer only draws 2 cards, and you can also surrender your cards for half your bet. When you don't want any more cards, say the word stand, the dealer said, shuffling his cards through his hands and manipulating them like a sculptor with a ceramic pot. I double blinked. Wager? What do I bet with? Play a game, and I'll tell you. The mystery man focused on passing out the cards. First, he brought out 2 cards for himself and dealt 2 more to each player. Instantly, he flipped over his cards. Jack King, 20. I clutched the velvet black card, seeing what I was dealt. A 10 and a 7 of hearts. I forced my face into a neutral smile. My stomach twisted. There was no way I could get 21 that easily. Surrender, I said, pushing my cards to the dealer. All he did was shuffle the cards and toss me 2 more. They didn't even bother looking up at me during the process. The other players started clutching his stomach. His smile vanished. I carefully looked over the guy's cards. 7 and a 2 of clubs. Hit me, the guy on the left choked out. An ace of spades. Total of 10. Sweat trickled down his head like a shower in April. His eyes welled up with tears, while foam developed in the corners of his mouth. I raised an eyebrow, wondering what his deal was. I knew the stakes of gambling, but my sixth sense was telling me something was just not right here. No, that couldn't be true. Even if there was some kind of string attached or fine print I didn't read, I couldn't risk giving up on that kind of money. Besides, this might have been my only chance to obtain such a vast reward without much risk. Hit me, the man wheezed. 5 of hearts. His teeth chattered. While I waited for my turn, I stood up and walked around the room, getting a closer look at all the ornate gadgets and such. My eyes focused on a painting on the leftmost wall. It resembled a man in a rich military regalia, but something made my hair stand on end. His upturned white mustache looked damp, and his face sagged like they were crying. Linear, stick-like shadows were cast on the sleeves. Edging forward, they came into focus. Hands. I followed their form outward, which extended into oily, dripping arms. Shh! A faint noise echoed from somewhere in the room. What? I mouthed, turning an ear to the source. Shh! It came from the painting. I backed away, hands at my side. Was someone dragged into that painting? Where are you going? You forgot to pay up, the dealer yelled back, hands slamming on the table and pulling out a sack of navy blue poker chips. I double-took. I thought the card said that no monetary wager was needed. There isn't. Then I looked at the ground. There was a second rug on the ground. The tapestry matched, but its pattern didn't match with the other rug. It was off-center from the rest of the decorations, like someone didn't even bother setting it up properly. Taking a closer look, I could hear faint whispers coming from it, too. When I looked back up, the guy on the left was gone. I rushed over, checking his cards. A total of 25. Swallowing saliva, I stood in confusion, wondering what to do next. I scraped my fingernails against my palm. I needed that money. If I didn't get it, I'd lose my wife and my apartment. And what about loan sharks? Only God knew what would happen to me if I didn't pay up. What was I going to do? What would happen if I lost? Would I turn into another object, just like the other guy? Or would it be a worse fate than that? That's because there isn't a monetary wager. I'm still taking half of what you owe. In my game, your payment is in pain. A sharp stab punched my left side. It felt heavier than before, like my veins were replaced with tungsten. I grabbed my fingers around my chest. The area around the pain almost felt like a tumor. Brushing around the area, I could make out a cylindrical mass. I tried to inspect it some more, but the pain overwhelmed me, and I crumpled to the ground. I crouched down on all fours, trying to get back to my seat, but the pain froze me in place. Reaching out a hand, I called out for help, but I got nothing. Slithering away, I pulled back the curtain to the entrance of the casino. I spat on the ground from the bludgeoning pain. Don't feel out of luck? You can still surrender once more and have 2 chances left. The dealer smiled, adjusting his hat. It was only a glimpse, but I caught a look at his upper face. His eyes were on his hat, and his forehead was blank. The dealer looked plucked straight out of an Alice in Wonderland book. What or who was this guy? Think long and hard about it. I saw you arguing with your wife. I clambered back to my seat. I still didn't know what the dealer did to me. Something in me forced me to get back up and keep playing. More questions ate at me the longer I played. How did he know that information? Then I remembered feeling a tap on the back at Grand Central Station. The card that brought me here. He couldn't have been human. Was he some kind of demon? I didn't bother asking. There wasn't any way he would spill the beans about his nature anyway. After what seemed like hours, I managed to writhe back to my seat, slumping over the table like I'd just had the worst hangover. Ready to try again? The charming man said, resting his chin on his interlocking hands. Reluctantly, I gave him a thumbs up. He took back the cards and began manipulating the deck again. I analyzed every move he made. None of the cards were tricked. He wasn't second dealing, and he didn't have any aces up his sleeve. Never revealing anything under the table either. His honesty was the only thing that brought me any reassurance. Still, keeping an eye out was critical. The dealer revealed his cards. 2 tens again. 1 of spades and 1 of hearts. His face was harder than diamonds and glowing like one, too. Not a pleasing glow, but one that vexed anyone that dared to glare at it. I looked at my cards. An ace and a 7. 18. Gripping my lower abdomen, I stayed crumpled in agony. The odds of getting a blackjack were slim, and the stabbing pain skewed my thoughts. "Surrender," I wheezed. The words slipped out of my mouth like a dying breath of a wounded soldier. The dealer smiled, holding a pile of blue poker chips around him. He waved his hand over the mound and made it an audible chant. Then they vanished. I held my hands over my face, bracing myself. Suddenly the pain doubled, shifting to my right like a mudslide down a hill. Now I knew everything the previous player was going through. I vomited out something hard and blue. It was a poker chip. Suddenly my guts turned and another 7 spilled out. My esophagus wound itself into knots, more contorted than cobwebs. "I forfeit." The man started to smile. "Without these?" With a thud, the hat-faced dealer pulled out a jar filled with a kidney and a piece of liver. They still oozed with blood that pumped and fit their containers. I remembered how the dealer said that there was no monetary wager. He never said there wasn't a wager at all, though. I paid in pain, and my wager was my organs. "You want them back? Then win them." He set them back on the ground. Now there was no choice. My fate was sealed if I tried to leave. I started to shed tears. If I didn't get those organs back and fast, I was done for. Even if someone saw me passed out on the floor, finding donors for organs wasn't guaranteed. And even then, it had just put me further in debt. Nothing would be solved. Then again, was trying to beat this guy even worth it? No, the reward was too great. Taking a deep breath, I sat back down. Reluctantly, I asked that he proceed. The dealer drew out cards like before. He took the cards and gave them a good shuffle. Plucking 2 cards out of the stack, he revealed them. A king and a 9. Another poker chip tumbled up my throat. I spat it out, red and blue plastic heaping together. Not paying attention to the mess I made, he handed me 2 cards. A jack and a 2. A 12. Hit me. An ace. An ace could count as 1 or 11, depending on what other cards were drawn. Still had a fighting chance. Hit me. A 5. His dead stare tore at my soul. I scratched against the felt, the wounds on my finger reopening. From the corner of my eye, I could see him frowning. Are you going to play, or do you want all that money to go to waste? Shut up, I said through gritted teeth. Hit me. I watched the dealer play out the last card. A queen. You lose, the dealer said coldly, grabbing a pile of poker chips and holding them close. He waved his hands over the mound and made another incantation. Then they vanished once more. Everywhere at once, burning pain seared my skin, making me black out. When I woke up, felt my arms, they were covered in something hard and blue and plastic. My clothes were gone. I examined my extremities and my torso. My skin was missing, replaced with poker chips. They were shaped to fit every part. Cracks filled with blood gushed out with every slight movement I made. Horrified, I spilled my guts. More poker chips slid out of my throat. Piles of skin laid clumped to the side of the table in hideous pink and blood-red sheets. I think you know what's at stake now. 1 try left. You better make it count, unless you want to end up as an object for all eternity. The rigidity of my plastic-coated skin made every movement expose more and more cracks, searing my muscles. I groaned as I raised myself up. Crimson liquid dampened the table. I pounded at it. This was it. I either walked out of here with my money and saved my marriage, or I lost and suffered a fate worse than death. Giving up was not an option. I gave the mysterious man a death glare, not even bothered by his resistance. He plucked out 2 cards, a 9 and a 10. This was my chance. Then my cards were revealed, a 10 and a 2. Fingers rattling, I took a deep breath and let the calmness seep into me. Hit me, I sputtered. Another 2. Huffing, I opened my mouth to speak again. The dealer just stared at me, tilting his head like a vulture waiting for roadkill. The poker chips rattled again, grinding against each other. Hit. I paused for a moment, collecting my thoughts. At a value of 14, I needed at least a 6 to beat the dealer, but an 8 or higher would result in disaster. Gulping down another chaser of saliva, I spoke. Hit me. To my chagrin, a 5 slipped out of the hand. I was now tied. Staring at the pile of skin and my other organs, I closed my eyes and shook in horror. An ace or a 2 were the only cards I could draw in order to win. I looked down at my cards, sweat dripping on the table. With a quick glance, I gazed at the eyes on the man's silk hat. Don't keep me waiting, the man demanded. I'd begun to hyperventilate. His stare grew more intense the longer I waited. His confident smile turned into a frown of irritation. Eyebrows and mouth were twisted into a hideous snarl. He rattled his fingers against the dealer's table. The cacophony made my ears go numb. Then I whispered, Hit me. The man darted up, smiling back in anticipation. I'm sorry, what was that? I closed my eyes, expecting the worst. Hit me, I screamed at the top of my lungs. Then the last card was revealed. A 2. I'd won. My mouth dropped open. The sheet of skin unfurled themselves and flattened over me. 2 organ jars spilled over, their contents rising in a beam of white and torpedoing back into my body. Immediately, I yelped at the top of my lungs, clicking my heels and doing a little jig. I regained my strength, instantly looking around for traces of my prize. For several minutes, I wasn't able to uncover anything. Staring directly at the dealer's face, I asked him to reveal the prize. "I don't have it with me," he said blankly. Not listening, I scrutinized every inch of the room, looking beyond his station, checking under the table, everywhere. I searched everywhere for my prize, my happiness dissipating. With each step I took, my smile faded even further, twisting into a frown. My nose crinkled. "Where's my 50 mil?" I demanded, overturning the table, ripping off the ornate paintings and yanking the tasseled rugs off the floor. "You promised me 50 mil if I beat you. Do you realize what's going to happen to me if I don't get that money, you charlatan?" The strange man just stood there, not even acknowledging my plea. "You promised me money. You're a thief," I roared, pointing an accusing finger at him. "I only did this for my wife, to save my marriage. I almost gave up my life trying to help my family out. You can't take that away from me." The demon stuck his hands behind his back and shook his head. He rolled his eyes back in thought. Something was up with him. "You aren't like the other gamblers," he said. "What other gamblers?" I said, looking back. "They all wanted the money for worthless things. A mansion with fountains and a view, hookers, a trip to Tahiti." He paced around me, his face rather relaxed and calm. Never once did he lose eye contact with me. "But you had such determination to help your family that you would risk everything. I admire that. It took me a while, but I figured out that you're actually a kind-hearted person." I saw red and tried to punch him. He grabbed my wrist, shoving it back. "Listen to me. I understand your rage. There never was a prize in the first place. It was nothing but a lure to capture those that wasted their lives away. But there's one thing you don't understand." I thrust my hand back. "I understand you nearly killed me for nothing." "Yes, but that was before I saw you the way you really were. Listen to my words." Slowly I relaxed my posture, but I remained firm. "Why should I listen to you?" "I can help you out of your situation." "You owe me money, you snake," I said, my nostrils flaring. "You never needed the money in the first place." Taken aback, I retreated. "What do you mean?" I said. My arms relaxed once more. "You're a plumber, aren't you? I saw you come home from work. I also caught a look at your schedule. 40 hours a week for $38 an hour for 5 days a week. That's $36,000 a week for 2 weeks. You already have everything you need." "But you don't understand. They need 4,000, I pleaded. He wouldn't budge. "Trying to earn this money via dumb risks and chance will not get you anything. Look at all the things you've done wrong." "And I want to change that," I said, wiping my eyes as they began to tear. "But what am I supposed to do now?" "The only way you can earn that money is through grit and spit," he said, walking around me. "You aren't going to find solace through good luck alone, and you already have the tools that some people don't. If you give up now, you might as well have lost. Think about it." With those last words, he raised his hand and snapped his fingers, disappearing without a trace. Slowly, I gathered my things and walked out of the casino, head hanging low. The next day, I was fixing an old lady's faucet, inspecting the leak. I wondered what the demon's words had meant. Before I stuck the wrench up to the U-trap, I remembered my pay. If I worked the same amount of hours as before, I'd only make $3,600. But if I pulled off some overtime and worked several extra hours, I might just be able to pay off the debt. I started staying up much later than before. Not long after, my wife started becoming suspicious. Eventually, she confronted me. "Frank, you've been staying up late. You going back to the casinos again?" she asked, hands on her hips. I closed my eyes, and instead of fear, calmness filled my veins, and my blood stilled. "Not this time. I've been putting in some overtime." Her face loosened up for just a moment before hardening again. I held my hands up and motioned my palms downward. "Listen, I've been horrible lately. All my gambling did was drown us deeper in debt. Her expression began to soften up again, her frown vanishing. I want to change things. We used to work so well together, doing everything to help each other. Instead of fighting against each other, it's time we made our peace, and we bring us out of debt together. I held my hand out for her to shake. She kept her arm pulled back and folded like a pincer of a mantis. Inch by inch, though, she extended it and took my hand. The following day, my wife convinced me to go to therapy and get out of my addiction, which I gladly obliged. Simultaneously, she decided to start up another job working as an electrician. Day by day passed, and we pooled our resources as one. Before our eyes, bills were paid, and debt disappeared faster than our eye floaters. Our financial status wasn't the only thing that changed. Her once crusty mood lightened up, and she began to smile more. She began to believe my words and began to respect the changes I made. And then we paid off our rent. We got a letter from our landlord saying that we now were even. The moment that letter came in, we embraced each other. The only question now was, what were we going to do with the extra money? Not long ago, we ended up earning enough to create our own 3D project, this time of a companion cube. Day after day, we create more projects. Although we weren't as happy as our days back in college, we still could make the best of what we had. In retrospect, the hat-faced man put up a good fight, but I managed to come out of the casino with more than I'd gone in with. It wasn't exactly money, but it wasn't worthless either. When I was in the 4th grade, I met this kid called James. He was a little weird, a bit more than anything, but once I got to know him, he seemed like a cool guy. The thing that stood out to me the most was how good he was at voice impersonations. A little too good, in fact. I wouldn't mistake his voice acting for the person that he was imitating if it wasn't for the fact that it came out of his mouth. However, there was one incident that made me want to stay away from the kid. Typing this out 15 years later, it still sends shivers down my spine. I still don't have an explanation for it, and quite frankly, I'd rather not have one. It was the night before Christmas break, December 12th at my school. As usual, we would go out to have snowball fights and go downhill with the sledge. You know, normal kid stuff. As I was collecting snow, I got a call from a distance. "Hey Thomas, time to go home, let's go." It sounded exactly like my mom, but when I turned around, I saw James giggling while hiding behind a mountain of snow. That was strange. I could have sworn that voice came from at least 30 feet away. But looking at James, he was definitely no farther than 6 feet. "Geez, I thought you were my mom for a sec," I said, pouting. James burst out laughing. "Caught you again. You're so easy to trick sometimes." "Shut up," I said. I was a little pissed at how good his impersonations were, but then again, it was funny to troll other people with, especially the teachers. More time passed by, and eventually, the teachers actually did call us over to let us know that my mom was picking us up. Our plan was to have a sleepover before Christmas break began. My mom picked us up in her car and drove us home. We were left alone with a babysitter for the night, since she had to go to work on her afternoon job, plus her night shift. She was a single mom juggling 3 jobs, so it isn't necessarily easy for her. James and I were in the playroom for a while before nighttime came. Bedtime was coming up, but knowing James, he was going to find a way to stay up and perform some kind of shenanigans. Our babysitter, Jackie, walked in and tucked us into bed, both mattresses on the floor, before turning off the lights and shutting the door. It was silent for a good few minutes before James' intrusive thoughts got the better of him. "Psst, Thomas," he whispered. "You up?" I turned around to face him. "Yeah, what's up?" Even though it was dark, I could sense James's devious grin. Clearly, he'd thought of some crazy idea. Clearing his throat, he spoke. "You want to play a game?" His voice caught me off guard. He perfectly impersonated the voice of my crush at the time, Hannah. Again, I could have mistaken it for her, if it wasn't for the fact that I could see James's face right in front of me. "You asshole. You would use her voice on me like that." I slapped his shoulder. He had his face buried in his pillow, holding in laughter. James's voice went back to normal. "Let's play Find and Listen," he proposed. For context, Find and Listen was a game James made up when we first met. I don't know if he'd had the idea before, but I'd rather not know. The game was that you would stand in the middle of the dark hallway and see what your eyes would start making up to scare the crap out of you. It was a really weird game, I know, but we were kids, and James was, well, James. So I went along with it, me and my naive mind. "You should go first," James said, grinning. "I'll buy you a pack of Oreos if you do." "Fine," I replied, getting up. Tiptoeing, I peeked under the door to see if Jackie was still awake. To our amusement, all the lights in the house were turned off, and I couldn't hear the TV, so I slowly creaked the door open. The coast was clear. Taking a deep breath, I stood in the middle of the hallway in silence, staring into the darkness. It was silent for the first few minutes. Even James, who would usually already be laughing his butt off, was completely quiet. Besides the dark walls getting bigger and smaller as I looked around, nothing abnormal happened at first. The first weird thing came soon after. Slight breathing was heard from far away. It wasn't any breathing I recognized, though. Eventually, the sound went from breathing to a subtle groan. A very, very deep groan. I started feeling pressure on my chest as if someone's entire weight was slamming against it. My breath shortened, body shaking. Whatever I was feeling, I certainly didn't think that I was safe at that very moment. As time went on, my heartbeat increased by the minute until eventually I could feel it in my throat. James, are you still there? I'm scared," I whimpered, my body shaking even more in discomfort. He didn't respond, but I knew he was because I saw his silhouette still laying down on the bed, sitting crisscrossed. I then felt something brush my shoulder. Jolting, I turned around to see nothing but the other side of the dark hallway. "James," I said, trying to hold the lump of tears in my throat. Again, no response. No matter where I was turning around, I could feel a passive presence behind me, a pressure that I never felt before. I closed my eyes and curled into a ball. However, the pressure only got worse. "James, can the game be over now?" I asked, tears forming in my eyes. This time I did get a response, but it wasn't James's voice. It was a soft girl's voice, and it had a slight echo to it. "I thought you were having fun," it said. "James, seriously, stop," I said, a bit louder. The pressure from behind me switched to the right of me. I could feel something right in front of me, staring at me with an intense glare. Hot breath simmered across my chest. It smelt bad, horrific even. "Come on, why don't we play together?" asked the same female voice. A gentle hand ran its fingers across my shoulder. I tensed up, my whole body, holding my breath. Even though I was used to James's impersonations, this pressure felt different, paranormal. The voice then went from gentle to a deep-throated growl. "It's okay," it said. Suddenly, I began feeling lightheaded. My consciousness began leaving me. It was a strange feeling I can't yet comprehend, even after so many years. The best way I could describe it is when you start seeing stars and feeling lightheaded after getting up too fast, combined with my head getting pulled upwards. I gasped and opened my eyes, and there it was, a dark figure with piercing red eyes and sharp teeth grinning right at me, its face longer than a console table. I let out a blood-curdling scream, tears running down my face. Almost instantly, the lights to the hallway turned on, and Jackie, the babysitter, ran up to me, asking if I was okay in a panic. I was paralyzed, petrified. My eyes were widened, my body still shaking, tears still dripping down my cheek. Next to Jackie was James, his face looking just as terrified. However, something about him felt off. His eyes were glowing a little more than usual. Not too much, but in a weird way, as if the glow was residue, slowly diminishing into nothing. Although barely noticeable, I could see it. James's glare was too familiar to me, but If that was the case, then what did I see? Why did it look so different to the James that I knew? I couldn't sleep that night. I insisted that the lights in the house stay on until my mom came in to pick me up. I slept next to her that night, and James was sent home early. He didn't come back after Christmas break. No one knows why James's family decided to leave without saying a single word after that. Not only did he leave the school, but the city. Strangely enough, no one's heard from him since. 15 years later, I still can't explain what happened that night. Like, James's eyes were glowing, his overly perfect voice impersonations, his strange personality, the eerie games that he liked to play. But one thing's for sure, I'd rather not have any answers to any of it. My name's John. I'm in my 20s and I just moved out of my parents' house. I'm in search of lower cost living, and I decided to move to a small town in Rainville Bay, southwest Michigan. It's one of those American towns you see in movies, spaced out houses, all built similarly. Most of the residents are elderly, making it very quiet for most of the year. No noisy parties, speeding cars, or anything like that, which I particularly love. However, shortly after moving, I noticed something weird. My neighbor, Mr. Anderson, has a peculiar habit of lighting a candle every night, religiously, at about 11:50 p.m., and placing it in his window. He stands there for about 15 minutes, gazing at it, and then he goes to sleep. On nights of strong wind or rain, he tends to shield it with something similar to a lantern. My curiosity was piqued, and I really wanted to know what it was all about. Was it a superstition? A local tradition, ancient enough for only the oldest or elderliest to remember? I don't even know how to ask him about it. I briefly mentioned it to an elderly woman, Mrs. Percy, a very kind neighbor who often shows up at my door with sweets and cakes. When I asked, however, she simply changed the subject, and this has happened more than once. One day, gathering my courage to approach Mr. Anderson directly, I walked up to his door and knocked. He opened with a friendly enough smile, and I hesitantly started asking him about the candle. He listened to my question, and for a moment, his eyes seemed pretty distant, as if recalling something. Then, he simply told me it was a family tradition, nothing for me to worry about. Unsatisfied with the vague answer, I tried to insist for more details, but he politely closed the door, saying he preferred to keep family traditions a secret. I was frustrated, but my curiosity only grew. I decided to search for information at the small cultural center in town, hoping to find some record that explained the tradition or someone who could shed some light on it. However, my efforts were in vain. The files were scarce, and the few available details on Rainville Bay didn't mention anything about lighting candles. I tried talking to the officials who handled the center, but they acted similarly to Mrs. Percy. Gradually, all this denial of information became an obsession for me. I waited all night by the window, just waiting for the moment when he would light his candle. On a holiday eve, I even stayed up all night to see if the candle could go out or when he would remove it. He removed it at exactly 5:55 a.m. I was running out of ideas. For a while, I even kept an eye on the neighbors' houses, watching if they would do the same. For some reason, only Mr. Anderson had this habit. With few options left, I went for my emergency plan. On that day, at exactly 11:50, I placed a candle in my window and lit it. It had been an intense work day, and I really needed to sleep, but I just couldn't. I sat in an uncomfortable chair in my room, facing the candle to avoid falling asleep. It didn't work so well because, slowly, Orpheus called me with his sweet song, leading me to Hypnos's arms. I relaxed, unconscious, when I heard a noise that made me jump from my chair. It was knocks, something hitting against the wood of my door. I looked through the window and saw Mr. Anderson at my doorstep. He knocked once more. "I need to come in," he shouted. "Let me in." I rushed down the stairs, still confused with everything. I approached the door as the pleas intensified, but When I reached the door, about to grab the handle, something triggered my instinct. I felt there was something wrong, and I decided to check before opening. I approached the peephole, staring at the one who disturbed my sleep. He was there, the familiar neighbor, but different. His mouth was open at an unconventional angle. His voice didn't come from his lips. It seemed to emanate from the black hole that was his mouth. His eyes darted frantically from side to side, unfocused on anything. From his chin, a thick foam dripped, forming puddles on the floor. His arms were bleeding and twisted, seemed crushed by the wood. Judging by the way they contorted, the blows intensified, almost as if the door was about to come off its hinges. I ran to one of the cabinets and pushed it to block the passage. It went on like that till about 5:50 a.m. I wondered why no neighbors had woke up with all this racket. I saw him through the window returning to his home, entering at exactly 5:55 a.m., appearing at his window to remove the candle. The rest of the day was a nightmare. I was sleep-deprived and had to drink about 5 cups of coffee to make it through the workday. The sleepless night left me like a human wreck. I had to go to work in that state, and the 5th cup of coffee in my hand felt like an illusionary comfort as I tried to stay awake. I couldn't help but think about the events of the previous night, the image of Mr. Anderson desperately banging on my door, haunting my thoughts with every blink. At the end of the workday, I decided I needed to understand what was going on. I took the way back home, nervous and tense. The town was shrouded in a peculiar silence, and the lights of the house hummed faintly. The street was deserted, with no signs of life besides me and the small details that made up the landscape, like the occasional passing car or barking dog. As I approached the home, I spotted Mr. Anderson in the distance. A wave of terror hit me, and I thought about turning back, avoiding the inevitable encounter. However, something inside me insisted that I needed to face the situation. He was walking slowly towards me, completely normal. His friendly and welcoming smile was back, in contrast to the hole that had been his mouth the night before. He waved when our eyes met. The scene was so distinct from the disturbing image of the previous night that I almost questioned my own sanity. "Afternoon, John," he greeted, as if nothing had happened. "Good afternoon, Mr. Anderson," I replied, trying to keep calm even though my heart was still racing. I hoped he would mention something about the previous night, but he continued the conversation as if nothing was different. We talked about the weather, the neighborhood, trivial things that made no sense in the face of the terrible experience we had shared. I was eager to get inside, past him, and went in, but before closing the door, I couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Anderson, are you okay?" He frowned, as if trying to remember, but shrugged. "Oh, the usual, young man. A backache here and there, but nothing major." I didn't know what to think. His answer was so casual, as if I were imagining things. He greeted me, and I saw that there weren't any scars, let alone wounds on his hands or arms. Could it have been my imagination? Unfortunately not. I'm well aware of that now, because night after night, he comes to scream at my window, saying he needs to come in, regardless of whether I have a candle lit or not. Believe me, I've tried both solutions with no result. Really starting to get used to it. It wouldn't be such a big problem till yesterday. I was setting up the desk to block the door as usual. I had already put the furniture on standby when Mr. Anderson started his noisy night. I was about to go to my room, put on my headphones, and get some sleep when I passed the staircase facing the back door, and then, while my neighbor screamed desperately that he needed to come in, I heard a single knock on the door in front of me. Since I lit a candle in my window, my neighbors ask every night for me to let them in, and now there's something knocking on my back door, too. My ex-husband always used to jump scare me. It was one of the things I hated the most about him. Well, he's doing it again. The most frustrating part is that he's been dead for 5 years. First, it was just slightly off-putting. It was in the earliest days of dating him. He'd be at my apartment, and I'd excuse myself to use the bathroom. He'd be waiting in some doorway or shadow to jump out and scare the crap out of me. It was even worse at his house. He lived way out in the middle of nowhere, and I was pretty much always low-level scared out there. But then he'd leap out from around a corner, and I'd be so scared I'd pee myself. I'd be ready to break up with him then and there, every time. In retrospect, that's obviously what I should have done. But I guess we all ignore our own inner voices sometimes, don't we? Well, obviously, or there wouldn't be so many people posting on No Sleep, trying to get other people to help them with dire problems they created by doing something stupid. Yet, here we are. I don't know why I let it slide, honestly. And that was only one of the many things about him that was terrible. Nonetheless, I repeatedly told him to cut it out, and I repeatedly did nothing when he failed to cut it out. Eventually, I even married him. He had 2 kids from a previous marriage who stayed with us a lot, and when they were there were also nieces and nephews staying over. I always liked when there was a house full of kids. It made the old, drafty, falling-down farmhouse we lived in slightly less terrifying. But you could count on my ex-husband to screw up a good thing. We were in the living room with all the kids. It was late at night. The kids were all still rowdy and playing around, he and I on the couch. There was a scary movie playing, which nobody was really paying any attention to. But Eric, my ex, got a funny look on his face and said quietly to me, "Watch this." Then he put his fingers to his lips to express that I should keep quiet. I instantly knew he was probably thinking of orchestrating some huge jump scare on all these kids. Even though he had actually given me a warning at least, I just didn't want him to do it. The youngest kid was only 4. I knew it would immediately kill the good vibes. I tried to protest, but he shushed me again, then scurried off to some other part of the house, unnoticed by any of the kids. I sighed angrily. I even tried to warn the kids, but they were all hyper and not really listening. Seconds later, Eric showed up outside the screen door and revved his chainsaw. The kids lost it. One of his daughters actually blasted backwards and got airborne in her desperation to get away from the door. The 4-year-old, of course, burst into hysterical tears, and soon they were all crying. Now, some of you reading this are probably laughing and thinking that's actually pretty funny. But the thing was, it was just so damn old. He did this dumb crap all the time. Plus, the world can really be boiled down into precisely 2 types of people. People who think it's funny to scare 4-year-olds so they cry, and people who don't. So, readers, I suppose you've sorted yourselves into teams at this point. Fast forward a few years from the dumbass chainsaw incident, and Eric and I had a son of our own. The thing about our son was that he had major, and I mean major, heart problems at birth. He had to have open-heart surgery, and he had a slew of other complications. No, that's not the point of the story, but just know that the first 8 months of his life were very touch and go. Then he was finally doing better, stronger even, able to do more. He was 9 months old, sitting on my lap, facing me. We were playing and chatting with each other when Eric lunged up behind me, grabbed him, and shouted. My little son did that thing little kids do when, for 1 full second, you don't know if they're going to burst into hysterical tears or laughter. In the end, my son burst into laughter. So did Eric. I, on the other hand, was livid. Who jump scares an infant, first of all? Secondly, who the hell jump scares an infant heart patient? That was probably the rudest I've ever been to Eric about the jump scare thing. But he just kept laughing the whole thing off, like he always did. Anyway, that wasn't why I divorced him, but we were divorced by the time our son was 3. We shared custody, and it went about how you'd expect things to go with a douchebag. But life proceeded, I suppose. When our son was about 10, he went through this phase where he started getting insanely jumpy. I mean, he just seemed incredibly paranoid. If I walked close to him or made any sudden movements, he'd flinch, almost like he thought I was going to hit him. At first, it actually sort of hurt my feelings. I had never hit my son. I didn't understand why he was being so jumpy with me. Then it started to scare me, because I wondered if someone else was hitting him. Maybe he was being bullied at school. He didn't go to his father's much at all, and I didn't imagine Eric would ever hit him. But, what if? Then I remembered the jump scaring. I finally thought to ask my son about it. He immediately revealed that, yeah, his dad jump scared him. All the time. "It's kind of annoying, Mom," he told me. Well, yeah, I thought. I couldn't believe I'd forgotten about it. I was so mad. He only spent limited time with our son. Why was Eric spending it jump scaring him so much that it was making him nervous and anxious all the time? What kind of crap was that? The problem was that Eric was the sort of co-parent that if I asked him for help with anything, or to back me up on anything, he'd do the exact opposite, just to be spiteful. Asking nicely never worked with him. So, if it wasn't something court-ordered, I didn't even really bother asking, because I knew he would just get worse. And let's face it, no family court is going to give a crap about somebody getting scared. I was mad as hell, but there wasn't really much I could do about it. Fortunately, he took the liberty of dying, and that took care of it. I don't mean to sound callous. Obviously, our son struggled with the death of his father, but the jumpiness subsided basically instantly after he found out that his dad was dead. Now, if your child's mental health improves because you die, it's probably because you were a crappy parent. I'm just saying. Anyway, another 5 years went by. Then I wrecked my car because a cat jumped out in front of me. I sat there in shock, gripping the steering wheel of my wrecked car. As I tried to catch my breath and make sense of what had happened, I noticed something strange. The air around me had grown cold, and a chill ran down my spine. I looked around, but no one was there. I tried to shake it off and focus on getting out of the car, but then I heard it. A low, guttural laugh echoed around me, and I froze. It sounded like my ex-husband's laugh, the man who had tormented me for years, emotionally and physically. I felt a surge of anger and fear wash over me, and I knew I needed to get out of there. I managed to escape the car and run to my house, but the eerie feeling never left me. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. I would hear footsteps in the hallway, even though no one was there. Objects would move on their own, and the temperature would drop suddenly. As I walked by the window glass on the shop on a sunny day, my own reflection seemed to lunge at me, and it scared the life out of me. A drinking glass exploded on the counter. Doors slammed in the night. Books fell from the shelves, landing with a thunk and a plume of dust. As the days passed, I realized that it wasn't just any spirit haunting me. It was my ex-husband. He was using his new ghostly powers to jump scare me from beyond the grave. The realization left me terrified. If he could do all this, what else was he capable of? I tried to find help, but no one believed me. They thought I was just imagining things, or suffering from post-traumatic stress. Sleep-deprived and desperate, I found myself in a police station, explaining the whole thing to a frazzled cop. He glared at me tersely, and I ended up feeling like an idiot. A gunshot rang out even as I told my story. The entire precinct jumped at what ended up being a gun going off by accident. Even so, the cop didn't believe me, of course, and sent me out into the rainy night, terrified of my own shadow. I was alone, trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't escape from. Now, as I sit here in my dark and silent house, I can feel his presence all around me. I was awoken moments ago when the bedroom door cracked violently into the wall. I know that at any minute he could jump scare me again, and this time I fear it won't be a harmless prank. I'm sitting here curled in a ball, shaking as I type this. I'm just trying to get it out, trying to leave behind my story, because I know it's only a matter of time until he scares me to death.